is a closer look at Conrad Stevenson's Fiat 600 Multipla. If you're not familiar with Alfa Romeos, a regular on the California Mille, or a competitor in the La Carrera in Mexico, you may not know Conrad Stevenson. He's known for his work in the restoration and racing of significant Alfa Romeos, from pre-war cars to 1900s, to Giuliettas and TZ1s, and other Zagato-bodied lightweights, and Bertone-bodied Sprint Specials. He's the lead mechanic keeping cars on the road supporting the California Mille event, a Pebble Beach Concord judge, and a multi-time class winner in the La Carrera Panamericana in Mexico, in cars that he's built largely from scratch. Let's talk to Conrad about this particular Fiat 600 Multipla.
So I was having lunch with a friend of ours and many friends in Berkeley at a Chinese restaurant with Martin Swig, who used to be a car dealer for Charlie Rosaghi in San Francisco. And he was talking about trying to sell Fiat 600 Multiplas. He said the parking lot was full of them and he was sure he wouldn't see the day when they finished selling them. It seemed they weren't powerful enough to go up the hill right outside the dealership. Well, after a Saturday lunch, I was driving back to my shop with a friend and he said he knew where there was a Fiat Multipla. So we went over there and I met the gentleman that bought this car, probably in '71 based on the registrations.
Stevenson purchased the car that day and trailered it to his shop that same afternoon. The car was assembled by Fiat and sold new in California in 1959 and was titled by DMV as a 1960 model year. It retains its early issue yellow on black plates from 1962, when California pulled all previously issued black on yellow plates to update the state's license plate color scheme. As Conrad stated earlier, the previous owner purchased the Fiat in 1971 and owned it for 37 years, and had been parked on a driveway with some body damage, full of parts, less than a mile from Stevenson's shop.
So the story the owner that I bought it from told me was that he bought the car while he was a student going to Santa Cruz and rented a garage in Piedmont and would sleep in the car and then commute 70 miles on Highway 17 to UC Santa Cruz.
This was possible with the 4 to 5 seat folding bed configuration. It had been parked and exposed to the elements since sometime in the mid-1980s.
As soon as we got it here though, the floors were giving out from all the weight of all the stored parts, engines, gearboxes. Before I even put the car in the back of my shop, I welded the floors back in. I beaded them myself and did, in general, the minimum amount of steel replacement needed to make it sound and strong. That happened along with the front cross members, and it had body damage to the left rear. I bought new panels and sectioned them to be of the Fiat Multipla dimensions, as they were different.
The timeline of the restoration was lengthy. Much of the heavy lifting with the bodywork and paint happened fairly quickly, but the process was stalled by a rusty fuel tank and sidelined further with numerous customer cars and several other personal projects, including the La Carrera SS race car. The aluminum trim was polished and cleaned in-house by Stevenson Restoration. The chrome was plated by Superior Chrome in San Jose, California. The seat frames were powder-coated, and upholstery was done by local shops. The elaborate rubber floor mats were sourced from Cicognani in Italy.
The challenges with Fiat's older cars is that they continue to make improvements to the models because there's many different versions. So many parts I buy just aren't applicable to the model I have, and you kind of learn as it goes that, you know, none of the Fiats that I had the same engines that they were born with. So it shows that, you know, parts were changing all the time, and also the parts were very cheap in the day, and so they're very difficult cars to build. They take a lot of patience to work with. You just don't order parts and get the right thing. And then I haven't helped matters by putting an 850 motor in the car, which makes it difficult to even do something like change or fill up the transaxle oil. It ends up being very close to where the rear wishbone is. So have to make a special drain plug and procedure for getting out the drain plug. But they just take such patience to work with. And with, say, an Alpha motor, or even if you work on a new Japanese engine, they've really made them that make them much easier to rebuild. So you have to pay attention as you put parts together, and then be willing to take it apart and continue to revise how the parts fit together. And that might seem like not a big deal, but it is a challenge to these cars. It can piss mechanics off.
Okay, we can see this is a 903 Fiat 850 motor. That's the big motor, because as we're pointing here, the serial number on the motor shows 040, which is the overbore. That's a 1mm overbore. And then over on this side, we can see that the base of the water pump has 4 bolts rather than 3. The earlier engines have 3 bolts, and the large 903 motors have 4 bolts.
I've upgraded this one to use the Fiat 850 engine and gearbox. And I decided to do that after driving one with a 600, and they're all good ways to go, but I was wanting a more robust transmission. And these have had a reverse rotation with the early gearboxes, and those parts were rare, and often with broken teeth, where the 850 was more robust. So I managed to squeeze in that transaxle. So to make this all work, the first thing is you put the big parts in place and then start driving it. And so some things happened right away. And in this case, I needed to make a better water recirculation tank, and I didn't want to have a big plastic thing. So I made this aluminum tank here, and it recycles with a very large tube that came from the 850. Another important thing for the cooling is that these pans be in here, like a belly pan on the engine bay, to create the right vacuum for the fan to draw through the radiator. That's very important, or they overheat. Another element I did was preserve the original 600 air filter, but modified it to fit the 2-barrel carburetor from the 850 Spider. Also extending this out a little bit more to fit a larger filter element. The Ducellier distributor from the 850, a little shaving, it's a very close clearance with the hood. And then I made these headers, modifying the 850 exhaust system to fit through the hole where the 600s were originally. And again, making a panel to create the right vacuum in the engine bay. To keep the fuel line cool, we made this pan, and also it just didn't look right with the fuel line coming out so close to the headers and the fuel pump here. So that helps prevent vapor lock, which siphons directly from the fuel tank, which is on the other side of this panel. The generator has been rebuilt, of course, and as well as the starter motor in the front. I was very lucky to work with Norman Racing on the cylinder head, and particularly Tim Morgan from Morgan Machine in Walnut Creek, who bored the block to fit the pistons that we got from Chris Ober. And I'm very happy with the performance of this engine.
This 600 is a road car and isn't kept hermetically sealed under glass. So let's speed through some of the imperfections pointed out for the bring-a-trailer auction of this Multipla. Very small rust on the front leading edge of the left door body edge under the front bumper. In extreme low-angle lighting, you get a sense of how straight the body panels are. Let's take the drip rail tour. All badges, emblems, and logos are excellent. Overall, the interior is in great shape. New door cards and panels were fabricated, including details like this battery box cover. This black knob is the heater control that allows water to enter the heater core, and it's fully functional. The ignition key works the door lock. Check the auction gallery for all of the door bottom and hinge images. The sliding side windows are functional. Let's speed through the glass and rubber. Most Fiat rubber securing the glass wear mark. The stock 12-inch steel rims are wrapped in new Pirelli Cinturato CN54 145/70/12 tires. Also included are a set of 13-inch steel wheels and hubcaps for better top-end freeway cruising performance. Let's go to the camera car and take a look underneath. All hard and soft brake lines were replaced. The brakes received new shoes and wheel cylinders all the way around. The brake master cylinder was also replaced. We've talked to Conrad about the engine. Let's dive in a little deeper on the rear end. The gearbox was inspected and all worn seals were replaced. The stock Multipla parking brake mechanism works off of the front of the transaxle, whereas Conrad has created a parking brake in the style of the Fiat 600D that works with the 850 transaxle.
Parking brake.
Okay, so this is the parking brake deal I made up, which pivots and then spreads the two shoes via the standard parking brake cable, the front part, and then it goes through the tunnel and operated up front. These are still the early style rubber couplings. This is an aluminum housing, and that's a part that is upgraded when all the Abarth cars to a CV joint fixture and a slightly larger, more modern hub pattern. I'm still running the early ones here, and they are working. And there are no cracks, but this is an area to watch. It's a little under duty for the larger gearbox. So if you were to continue with the theme, you would go to a CV joint here. We just recently drove it down to the Monterey Historics in Pebble Beach and had a very successful drive all the way down Highway 1, and it's just a joy to drive.
positive attention, waves, and smiles this Fiat Multipla attracts, it's impossible to have a bad day when you're behind the wheel or just riding along.